Prologue, The Stranger. Harris sank into his chair at the round table, the old wood creaking beneath him. Sunlight filtered through the grimy windows of the Hollow Hearth Tavern, casting long streaks of gold across the floorboards. A glass of whiskey rested in his hand, the amber liquid catching the light as he swirled it lazily. His other hand was already busy gathering his cards, fingers flipping them into order. The Hollow Hearth was a familiar place to him. Harris and his brothers semi-frequented this establishment, and the barkeep knew better than to ask too many questions. His brothers, Davin and Will, sat to his left and right. The air inside the tavern was thick with the scent of spilled ale, burnt tobacco, and sweat from the patrons. Outside, Brockton stirred to life. Harris heard the merchant hollering prices out next door, wheels rattling over uneven roads, and the distant chatter from the stable across the street. He kneaded his right temple with his knuckles. Harris exhaled slowly, sending a cloud of smoke rolling over the wooden table. His cigar crackled as it burned, the ember glowing brightly as he took another drag. Will leaned back in his chair, electricity flickering along the tattoos that snaked down half of his face. He tilted his head toward Harris's empty glass, his features twisting into a smirk. "Easy there," Will said. "We might be sitting on some gold, but don't mean I want to watch you drink us dry 'fore noon." Harris scoffed, flicking ash off his cigar. "Shut your damn mouth and play your cards," he muttered. "Plenty of coin. Ain't like it's gonna run off." That much was true. Brockton was a town of commerce. Multiple main roads happened to intersect here, turning an otherwise unimportant area into a small, bustling trade city. It was a safe haven for those who knew how to navigate the heart of Caliban. Merchants, bounty hunters, and fugitives alike. To the south loomed Dark Wolf Hollow, an ancient forest that had rumors circulating ever since the first man stepped on this continent. Further south than that, the Kingdom of the Reeds, the sprawling empire of the Proudfolk, a warrior race of beasts. To the west lay the Plateau Desert, an inhospitable wasteland where the temperatures rose higher than anywhere else on the continent. Brockton was conveniently located right in the center of these dangerous places, a respite for weary travelers. The morning mist still clung to the treetops, casting an emerald light in the air. Many believed the forest to be haunted. Rumors of spectral wolves and robed figures wandering through the forest dated back centuries. The rumors kept outsiders from looking too closely, which was precisely what they needed. Those foolish enough to ignore the warnings often found themselves at the mercy of something much worse and real than spirits. Harris and his brothers had made a living off such men, and their most recent haul, an assortment of coins, gemstones, and jewelry, was proof that business had been good. It would have been better if the children of the woods hadn't taken up refuge there months ago, but Harris was smart enough to leave those freaks be. Davin leaned forward, slapping his cards onto the table with a smug grin. His thick braid swung over one shoulder as he chuckled. "If I didn't know better," Harris said, "I'd swear you were counting cards." Will spat. "You say that like he even knows how to count." He leaned forward, grinning wider. "He's dumb enough to lose count of his own fingers." Davin flashed a smile, eyes showing no humor. The scars on his arms and the axe on his back spoke plenty, but it was his eyes that made Harris shudder. There was something feral behind Davin's eyes. It wasn't madness, but hunger. The kind that didn't see people. Davin saw meat. Harris had seen it too many times not to recognize the look. Cold, calculating, and waiting for the moment to pounce. Davin didn't only fight like a beast. He truly was one. Bones and blood bending into the shape of predators. A wolf, a panther, a bear. He was a shifter. Harris had watched him tear men apart like a wild animal. It was the kind of look you'd see in a lion's eyes right before it pounces. Most people couldn't meet his stare for long. They didn't know why, but Harris did. It was because Davin wasn't always a man. Not fully. Harris took a slow pull from his glass. "Keep running your mouth, brother," Davin said, voice full of amusement but laced with something darker. "One day it's gonna get you put down." "That's what you're here for," Will shot back. "No point in dragging around a block of meat if it ain't keeping me in one piece." Harris chuckled under his breath, shaking his head. The back and forth was a familiar respite from all the violence and blood. They could trade verbal jabs all morning, but at the end of the day they were still brothers, and in their line of work, family was the only ones you could trust. Outside, the morning carried on, the hum of Brockton growing louder as more people took to the streets. The sun was climbing higher, burning away the last remnants of mist that curled along the rooftops. Harris smirked, tossing another coin in the betting pile. It was shaping up to be a good day. Their banter was cut short by the sound of heavy boots on the wooden boardwalk outside, each step accompanied by a metallic jingle, as if a bag full of coins was being shaken. The rhythmic thud and jingle echoed through the doors, drawing the attention of those inside. A gust of wind swept through the tavern as the doors creaked open, the hinges groaning. Harsh sunlight poured in, casting long shadows across the scuffed floorboards. A lone figure stood in the doorway, silhouetted in the glaring light. His wide-brimmed hat dipped low, obscuring most of his face. He stood there for a moment, allowing the anticipation to thicken like a storm cloud rolling in. Harris saw the outline of horns and a tail in the silhouette. The hollow hearth fell into an uneasy silence. Conversations died mid-sentence, and all patrons seemed to hold their breath at the newcomer. Even the tavern keeper, a man who had likely seen his fair share of trouble, froze with a glass in hand. Behind the bar, a single bead of sweat traced a slow path down his temple. Harris's fingers drifted towards the hilt of his dagger. The brothers exchanged a glance, their expressions confused, but they could all feel the danger in the air. Brockton was a town that welcomed its fair share of trouble, but something about this man felt different. "Can I help you, son?" the tavern keeper called out, trying to keep his voice steady, but it faltered ever so slightly and betrayed his nerves. The figure tilted his head slightly, considering. Then, in a slow, twangy drawl, he replied, "Oh, don't mind me, sir." He stepped further inside, letting the doors swing shut behind him. "I'm just looking for a few gentlemen that I believe to be taking up patronage in this fine establishment." As he stepped out of the sunlight, the tavern's dim light unveiled his features. His skin was the color of fresh spilled blood, weathered by years under the sun. Beneath the shadow of his wide-brimmed hat, 2 black horns curled from near his temples. A hell touched. His outfit bore the marks of extended travel. Dust clung to his leather vest, and his boots carried the wear of countless miles. A thick belt cinched his waist, weighed down by pouches, but it was the strange metal contraption in a leather sleeve at his hip that drew the most attention. His fingers rested against it, as if it were an extension of his very being, or a weapon. Behind him, his tail flicked absently. He smirked. "I'm looking for the Watchinson brothers." Will's chair scraped against the wooden floor as he rose to his feet, his expression dark. "Who's asking?" The devilish stranger let out a low chuckle, spread his hands, and looked around the room, palms up as if to say the answer was obvious. "Ain't it clear?" His grin widened. "I am." The stranger flicked his wrist and unfurled a rolled parchment, letting it dangle for all to see. The tavern's occupants leaned in, eyes locking onto the faces sketched in dark ink. 3 portraits, each one a rough but undeniable likeness of the men sitting at the table. Harris's gaze drifted downward, following the bold letters stamped beneath them. Reward, 500 gold per head, wanted dead or alive. The silence deepened, the only noise being the wind that howled through the cracks in the tavern's walls. "I don't know who you think you are," Will growled, stepping forward. Lightning crackled down his arms, arcing between his fingertips. "But usually, when someone comes around asking about us, it doesn't—" Bang! Will's head snapped back violently, his body jolting as if struck by his own lightning. A gaping hole had torn through the back of his mouth, silencing him forever. For half a second he stood there swaying, sparks still flickering along his fingertips. Then his legs gave out, and he crumpled to the floor flat on his back with a heavy thud. Dead before he hit the floor. The hollow hearth went deathly silent. The stranger spun the smoking iron weapon around his finger, completely unfazed. "That was Will, I presume? Did hear he was a talker of the group," he mused like he had just swatted a fly. No one moved. No one breathed. Many in the tavern had seen blood and death before, but this was different. There was no warning or build-up, just a sudden and unexplainable death. Harris's chair scraped against the wooden floor as he shot to his feet, his breath caught in his chest. He stared at Will's body in disbelief, his mind refusing to accept what had just happened. Then his voice cracked as he spoke. "Huh? Devin! Get him!" Bang! Harris barely registered what had happened at first. He felt a force slam into him. His body spun to the side. Then he saw what had happened. His right hand was gone. A bloody stump remained where his wrist had been. His severed hand hit the tavern floor with a wet thump. His half-smoked cigar sailed through the air, embers trailing behind it, before landing with a soft bounce on the wooden table. Sparks scattered across the surface, burning tiny grooves into the wood. Harris staggered backward and his breath caught. A strangled, gasping noise crawled up his throat, but he swallowed it down hard. His knees trembled. The world blurred at the edges. Davin was already rushing forward. The largest of the Watchinson brothers lunged from his seat. A double-bladed iron axe hummed as he pulled it from his back. He swung in a broad horizontal arc, meant to take the red Hell-Touched's head clean off. The stranger barely moved. A single step back was the only move he made. The axe whooshed past his face, missing by less than an inch, before burying itself in the wooden support beam. The force of the impact made the entire tavern tremble. Dust rained down from the rafters around the pair. Davin yanked, trying to free the weapon, but it was wedged deep. The Hell-Touched, who was still smiling, chuckled. Then he kicked Davin's knee in. A sickening crack rang out as the joint snapped backward. The noise made the hairs on Harris's arms stand straight. Davin let out a strangled cry, collapsing forward. Then slowly his scream twisted into something else. His body convulsed, muscles bulging, bones cracked as they expanded. His skin became hidden beneath a wave of thick fur that expanded across his body, his fingers curling into razor-sharp claws. His howl deepened into a guttural bestial roar. Then the bear that once was Davin charged. Bang! 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 The bear stumbled. Its body lurched mid-stride, and for a moment it looked as though it might keep charging. Then its knees buckled. The massive creature swayed, chest heaving. Then with a deep rumble it collapsed. The tavern floor shook beneath its weight. Its breathing slowed, then stopped. Harris hadn't moved since he lost his hand. His ears were ringing, and his vision swam. Somewhere in his brain, he knew the scent of blood and fire filled the air, but all he could focus on was the knife in his hand. His only hand. His breath came in ragged gasps. The sound of heavy footsteps accompanied by a metallic jingle pulled him out of his daze. He tightened his grip on the blade, holding it out in front of him as if it might actually make a difference. The Hell-Touched, now standing only feet from him, just smiled. Who the hell are you?" Harris asked between gasps. The crimson stranger smiled. "You can call me Mace." Bang! Mace strode over to the newly slain man, his boots echoing throughout the silent tavern. As he approached, he snapped his fingers, producing a flicker of hellfire that danced along his fingertips, before vanishing into the chamber of his iron. The weapon hummed, the scent of sulfur and smoke lingering in the air, as he spun it once and slid it smoothly back into his holster. He grabbed Harris's half-smoked cigar off the table. "It'd be a waste of good tobacco," he said to no one with a smile. He knelt beside Harris's corpse, his movements casual, and rummaged through the dead man's coat. He pulled the drag of the cigar, then pulled it from his mouth. He haphazardly tossed the rolled tobacco over his shoulder. Suddenly, his tail shot up and wrapped itself around the cigar. It held the cigar firmly while Mace focused on looting his quarry. His fingers closed around a leather bag and 2 cigars. He pulled once and freed them from their resting place. Coins clinked inside, but Mace wasn't just here for gold. His hand drifted to the hilt of the sword strapped behind his right shoulder, and with a smooth motion he drew it free, the steel whispering against the scabbard. He glanced up at the room, at the wide-eyed, pale-faced bystanders frozen in their seats. The bartender clutched the bar top, his knuckles white. "Y'all might want to look away for this next part," Mace said, flashing them a grin. He set to work. The wet scrape of steel cutting through meat was one of the 2 sounds in the room. As Mace took the first Watchinson brother's head, the other was the tune he whistled. Blood pooled beneath the body, the scent of blood thick in the air. Mace barely gave it a second thought as he moved on to the second man, rifling through the corpse for anything of value, before taking his head as well. He held his hand to his side, and his tail placed the cigar between his fingers. He took another drag. He turned back to the third brother, and only then realized something was wrong. The spot where the bear had fallen was empty. Instead, a smear of blood streaked across the floorboards, leading out the tavern doors and into the streets beyond. Davin had crawled his way to freedom. Mace sighed, shaking his head. "Gods damn it, Mace," he muttered to himself. "If he were a snake, he would have bit you." Then after a pause, he chuckled. "Guess he tried to as a bear," he thought to himself. Mace reached into his bag, then retrieved the pouch he had taken from Harris's corpse. He stepped over the bodies while approaching the bar, and casually upended the pouch. A cascade of gold coins and small gems spilled across the counter, clinking as they scattered. "For your hospitality," Mace said, tipping his hat to the bartender. Then, without another word, he strode toward the door, following the trail of blood. He had a job to finish.